All right, onward to vowels for part 3. A vowel is made by resonating the vocal cavity without restricting air. So vowels are sounds that are phonetically distinct as a group from consonants because you're not stopping air when you say ah, e, o, and so forth. From a phonological point of view, they can be what linguists can call the peak of a syllable, or we can think of as the core, the essential part of a syllable, and in fact can be a syllable all on their own. You can have the sound O, and O is a word. Actually, O is a couple of different words, and it doesn't need any consonants to be a word. A vowel can be a whole syllable. A consonant can't from a phonological point of view. And then there's a question of how many we've got. We've got at least 12 in English. And you remember we only have about 5 or 6 letters to spell them, but we've got at least 12 distinct sounds. And depending on the theories you're working with and your goals and who you're talking to, you might count as many as 20. Particularly if you're in a phonics course and you're focused on helping kids learn to read and write by sounding out words, you will be taught to think of some sounds like the R controlled vowel and heart as distinct sounds. From our point of view, they're probably best considered as allophones of another vowel sound, but that never helped a kid learn to read. So don't charge into a reading or a literacy or a phonics course and say Carlson said you're wrong. Because in fact we're in contested territory here, and there are different theories of phonetics, phonology, and then different practical needs people have for describing sounds. For our purposes, we're going to stick with really 12 vowel sounds, and I'll trouble that a little bit as we go further. In order to talk about vowels, we can't really talk about our place of articulation, place of articulation and manner of articulation the way we do with consonants, because you don't stop the air. They're much slushier and vaguer than this. So we talk about height and we talk about backness or frontness. And this all has to do with describing the position of the tongue in your mouth. Because again, you make a vowel by resonating your open oral cavity, and you distinguish vowels by making subtle changes to the shape of that resonant cavity. This, by the way, is one of the reasons you can tell on the phone whether somebody's smiling, because you can actually hear them smiling because the shape of their mouth changes and the sound of the vowels changes. I'm going to go back to grimacing now and looking serious, and you can probably tell the difference. So this lovely diagram shows us something about what it means to say a vowel is high or low. And high is sometimes, in your book too, called close or close, and low is called open. And E, that red letter that looks like an I, is representing E for us, as in machine. And it's a high vowel, and you can see the tongue is hunched up high in the mouth here, and it's obstructing the front part of the mouth too. We'll talk about that in a minute. Whereas if you say ah, you will have your tongue lowered in your mouth, and you will be pronouncing what we call a low vowel. Our jaw sometimes moves together with this, so we can think about height of a vowel as jaw position. A high vowel, E, with my mouth pretty closed, or ah, with my mouth pretty open. Although tongue position is much more important in the pronunciation of the sound. This, by the way, is why we ask people to say cheese when we take a picture, because they will spread out the corners of their mouth and look a little bit more like they're smiling, and they will close their mouths. But or almost close them. And doctors ask you to say ah, because you're going to open your mouth and get your tongue out of the way, so he or she can look in there and see what's happening. So we talk about height. Your tongue is either closing off a lot of your mouth or it's opening up a lot of your mouth, and that tells us whether. And we describe that by saying a vowel is a high vowel, your tongue's up high, like the E sound, or your tongue is down low for the ah sound. We also shift our tongue to open and close the front and the back of our mouth. And that shifts our resonant chamber and changes the sounds of vowels. So there's that E is a machine. It looks like an I on this. We're using phonetic symbols, not English letters. Not only a high vowel, it's a front vowel. And if you notice in this diagram, the tongue is sort of hunched up in the front of the mouth. And if you say E, you'll notice you're doing something similar. So practice it a few times. Say E, E, E. Conversely, if you say oo, oo, or o, or aw, as in wall, the lowest and backest of vowels, you will notice that your tongue is shifting backwards in a way that opens up a larger part of your mouth, but hunches up towards the back instead of towards the front. So if your tongue's moving up into the back of your mouth, we call it your back vowel, and if it's moving into the front of your mouth, we call it a front vowel. And this gives us our E. I'm going to read them from the top left counterclockwise. So E, A, Ah on the left-hand side, and oo and o on the right-hand side. Those are your back vowels. I'll draw our attention to the letter A, which represents ah as in father here. Is it a front vowel? Is it a back vowel? It's kind of traditional to talk about it as a back vowel most of the time, even though it varies a lot according to your dialect of English. So if you're a little bit like Hermione Granger and you say father, father, it's definitely a back vowel. If you're from Wisconsin and you say father, it's a pretty front vowel. There's a lot of variability in how far front or back the ah is in particularly in American speech, but in global English across the board. So don't panic if I've told you it's a back vowel and you see a diagram that says it's a front vowel. Maybe somebody in Wisconsin made the diagram. Wisconsin made the diagram. It's possible. This is the traditional chart of general American English vowels. And we've got the high, mid, low on the left there and front, mid, back. I've added mid to both of these because we need it. And by the way, notice our sound symbols, our phonetic symbols, are in brackets, and that means we're really meaning to depict sounds. We're not spelling stuff. Some of these happen to also be Latin letters, but take a look at the symbol for put or the symbol for but or bought, and notice that that we've got extra symbols here that don't come directly from the alphabet. And by the way, this gives you some insight into the difficulties of spelling English. The Latin alphabet was developed to spell Latin, and it worked just fine with 5 vowel symbols. And then they borrowed that Y from Greek, so that's sort of redundant and nice. But when that alphabet was turned to the purposes of spelling English, it's really not adequate to the task. The Germanic languages have a bunch more vowels, and English has about 12. And again, this depends somewhat on your dialect, on your regional variety. This is based on the pronunciation that you'll mainly hear on TV in a sitcom or something, General American English, that you hear a newscaster say. Many of us have regional accents that are a little bit different from this. So I'm going to pronounce these from top left down to the bottom and back up to the right with the sounds that are meant to be represented here. The high front vowel is beat. The almost high front vowel is bit. The mid front vowel is bait, a. The next one is bet, eh. We have bat, a. Father. We've discussed the difficulties there. Bought. This aw is in bought is not common to every American speaker. It is to many varieties of American English. And it's a lot like the aw in Harry Potter, if you want to Britishise it a little bit. I'll leave the two in the middle alone. We have the O as in boat, and it's probably best to think of this as the Minnesota O as in boat, even though most of us really say boat. There is the is put, and oo as in boot. Two remain, the mid vowels. We have the schwa, and they're special. We have the schwa as in about. The schwa, that upside down E, is the unstressed, slack, neutral vowel that we use for almost all unaccented syllables in English, administration has a couple of schwas in it. And then there's that upside down V as in but. Really, most American speakers never use this vowel unless they're dropping an F-bomb and being really emphatic about it. That's how you get the sound in English. Pardon me. As you look at this chart, I want you to practice saying a few of the different sounds and notice, feel where your tongue goes in your mouth and oppose the sounds to each other. Say beat and boot a few times. E, oo, and notice where your tongue goes, that there's a difference between the front vowel and the back vowel. And similarly, there's a difference between the E, A, and A, or E and Ah, or oo and ah. Oppose the high and the low vowels and the front and the back vowels to get a visceral feeling for where your tongue is and what it means to say you've got high vowels, low vowels, front vowels, back vowels. You need to be able to describe high, low, front, and back vowels in this course. I will not pin you down on whether your father vowel is mid or back or a little bit front, because that's regionally distinct. Onward. The chart we just looked at is the traditional chart. It's the chart we're mainly going to rely on in this course because it provides a good map of the vowels that lets us talk about the historical development of the sound system in English. It's not really considered to be the most accurate pronunciation map of vowels by contemporary phoneticists and linguists. And here's a more modern chart that talks about front vowels generally, and vowels where your tongue is raised and vowels where your tongue is retracted and pulled back into your mouth. You can find charts like this and study the finer points of phonetics on your own. I won't trouble you with them. And by the way, this is an IPA, that is an International Phonetic Alphabet chart, that means to map all possible vowels, or most possible vowels, not just English vowels. So don't panic when you see this one. But here again, if you run into another class and somebody says, my gosh, here's the vowel chart, remember that different vowel charts serve different purposes. This traditional chart is theoretically advanced enough for the history that we need to tell. This is theoretically more sound for the work of distinguishing the vowel sounds of a living language and really talking about how the tongue works. But phonetics isn't the thrust of our course. There's one more thing we need to talk about in English. Actually, there are two more things we need to talk about in English vowels. High, low, front, and back are not the only things you can do to make vowels different from each other, but they're the main things that actually matter in English. The other thing you can do is switch your vowel out and say instead. And you can also round your vowels. And in modern English, this isn't very important because is a rounded vowel. If you say you pucker your lips up a little bit. And the same goes for and the same goes for o, and the same goes for aw. Those are all rounded vowels. But we don't care very much about rounding when we're talking about modern English, because rounding is never the single feature that makes a difference between two vowels. It's just not. That's in contrast to German, for example, where rounding has to be spelled as umlaut by putting a diaeresis, the two dots above by putting two dots above above your vowel symbol. And we'll talk more about that when we get into Old English phonetics, where it does matter. But we can round vowels. We talk a lot about vowel length. And particularly if you end up in a phonics class, because you're learning to teach kids to read and sound out words, you will, and spell, you will talk about vowel length. And that's a traditional nomenclature that works, but one that we're going to restrict. Historically, to say a vowel was long literally meant that that vowel took more duration than other vowels. And in Old English, there's a phonemic distinction between mon, which meant man, and mon, which meant crime. Mon, mon. Different things. So and are phonemically distinct. God and God are phonemically distinct. They're modern English God and good. You notice one has a double vowel. It was long. In modern English, vowel duration, literal vowel length, differs, but it's not very important. The way it differs is vowels are longer before some sounds, especially fricatives, than other sounds like stops. So if you have stat and staff, if you say those carefully or ask other people to read stat and staff, you will hear that they say the in staff longer than the in stat. And it doesn't make a distinction between the two words. Literal vowel length is really not very important. And when we talk about long vowels and short vowels, we're really describing something more complex and also more subtle in a distinction between the two sounds. This is a rehash of our traditional chart. You'll recognize all the same syllables on there, symbols on there, and I'll use my cursor here to sort them out. This is the E as in machine. This is I as in bit. A as in bait. E as in bet. A as in bat. And we have U, boot, put, O, boat, O, bought, father. Notice this chart puts it in the back. Maybe it was a Brit who wrote it. That's a slippery sound down there. But you notice that we have a distinction here between tense vowels and lax vowels. And this little inner chart sorts those out. The ones on the inside of the chart include our traditional short vowels as in I, bit, e, bed, and a, cat. Also as in put. These are traditional short vowels. Leave that short, our school teacher short vowels, set that aside. And the ones out here are the ones we usually think of as, we're taught to think of in a phonics course as long vowels, U, O, E, A. It's best to think of these vowels in the white, E, A, U, O, as tense vowels. And what that really means is, well, linguists argue, but as the chart suggests, they are a little bit extra. They're a little bit higher, they're a little bit fronter, or in the back vowels, they're a little bit backer. And in many varieties of the language, they take on a complexity that is like a diphthong, which will be our last slide in just a second. They are not a single sound in all varieties of English. So whereas I is in bit in general American English is a simple sound, I, the E sound can be the E sound can be more complex. The A sound can be drawn out to be more complex. The oo sound, you notice that your mouth moves while you say these sounds, and especially boat. Right now, some of you are going, my gosh, we all talk differently, and this is an important way we talk differently, and it really is. Southern speakers might be saying something more like boat or bait or be it for bit. And I don't mean to offend anyone, I'm deliberately exaggerating there, just to direct us to some things that I hope we'll find familiar. To sum up without going in a circle, we sort our vowels out by whether they're high, mid, or low, front, mid, or back, central on this chart. High and low are synonyms for close and open. If you think of high and low as your jaw position, that tells you whether you're talking about closed or open. And we distinguish in modern English between tense vowels and lax vowels. Our tense vowels, there are only 4 of them, they're a little extra. They're a little fronter or backer, and they're a little higher than their neighboring vowels. Now, the final slide. There is one more sort of vowel action you can have in English or in many languages, and it's called the diphthong. A diphthong counts as one sound, but it's a vowel that you pronounce in two different ways. We can think of it as two vowels smooshed together. And I've got some spelled and drawn out for you in a couple of different ways here. So the sound in hey, a, is, if we say it really slowly, is really two vowels. But from a phonological point of view, from a syllable and word building point of view, it's one sound, a. It's just a complex sound that begins in one place and ends in another. It begins mid and it ends high, a. And the same goes for, something similar goes for I, as in high. It begins low and it ends high. Ow, ow, and o, and oi, or oi, are all also diphthongs. I'm going to keep our discussion of diphthongs as limited as I really can as we go forward, and point out that the distinction between diphthongs and a monophthong, a simple vowel, is a matter of theoretical debate, and it's also a point of difference between my historically minded traditional scheme of vowel arrangement and the schemes of vowel arrangement that you might find in a phonics course. So again, in a literacy class and a teaching reading class, you're going to find the vowels theorized and organized a little bit differently and probably more inclusively. So don't panic if you find that in the future, and certainly don't tell your professor they're wrong because they disagree with me on this point. There are some theoretical and denominational differences here. So diphthongs, complex vowel sounds, looks like two vowels, sounds like two vowels smooshed together, functions in syllable and word building like a single sound. That's what I've got for you about vowels today. So enjoy, practice the vowels, practice the consonants, spend some time making funny noises with the chart and figuring out which ones you're actually saying.